Uh, we're going to do a class today on the dynamics of lifting. As you see out there, everything that we do requires some type of rigging, some type of lifting. We have a lot of crane usage, a lot of forklift usage. So the proper techniques for lifting are critical for safety and for minimizing product damage. So we're going to go through, we just have a kind of a real basic class this morning. We're going to go through it, and I have a couple visual aids that we're going to try to use to help people understand what changes when we change minor rigging things. So first of all, precast industry injury statistics. So this is only our industry, and these are the most common type of injuries that we have based on a percentage of claims. So 24% of all injuries in our industry are forklift related, 17 are crane related, 15% have to do with chains, cables, and spreader bars, and then 14% and 13% by product, truck and trailer, and then everything else is 17. But the big thing to take note of, the top three types of injuries that we have in our industry are all directly related to lifting and rigging. So a lot of potential for injury there if we don't do our job correctly. So this is, of those crane and rigging related injuries, this is the type of injuries that have resulted in the most dollar claim. So struck by and against, 60%. Things falling from elevation, 22%. Failed to observe clearance is 1.5, and then caught in, on, or between is 1%. But the big thing is, we don't want anybody here getting hurt. No injuries. So this is actually footage from our camera system. This happened in August, so just a couple months ago. And the big takeaway I want everyone to see here is that every single part of our rigging operation, any one of those could fail at any time. I've personally seen several instances where anchors have pulled out of concrete. You could have crane systems fail. This is the first time that I've seen this, and it was a real big eye-opener. So this is, you'll see when we play this video, the rigging chain is going to fail completely. So right there, watch that lift. Just keep an eye on it. I want you to watch how quickly this happens. Right there. So that's one of the 3/8 inch single chains, rated at about 39,000 pounds. We were well within our working load limit here. We weren't overloading the chain. So there wasn't a side pull. The lift was nice and slow. So as far as I can tell, nothing was done wrong there, but the chain failed. Now, that happened in the best possible situation where the tank was still, if it was lifted at all off the ground, maybe an inch or so, but it doesn't look like it even lifted. It was starting to get tension, but I want you to think about all the times you see people out there, and they may be new to our company, but I want you to think about how often you see people get close when things are lifted in the air. And if that would have happened while it was raised in the air and someone was under it, we could have easily had someone lose their life. So that's the worst case scenario that we never want to see here. So this is another video from our operation, and it's just another opportunity to show what could go wrong at any point. Does everyone know what this is? Call it out. Somebody?
L-bar.
L-bar? Does anybody know what it's for?
To connect pieces of concrete together.
Yep. So whether we're doing a catch basin where we pour it all in one monolithically, or we're doing a panel piece where we'll pour the base and leave these extended out of it, this is a really important part of that structure because it ties the walls of that structure into the base or anywhere, anything we're building out there that's two separate pieces of steel that are meeting. If you don't have a continuous piece of steel that ties that together, you really have nothing but the concrete holding that together. So I want you to watch this video. You see, that's what we're watching right there. So again, this happened, we were very fortunate, in one of the best possible times. I think Miss Lisa pointed out, you know, I think it was cold morning or something like that. So that concrete failed early on. Now imagine, as everyone knows here, concrete, the warmer it is outside, the stronger it's going to be when we're doing that stripping operation. So imagine if that piece failed when it's flying on top of all those molds. You have guys that may not be directly underneath it, they might be a mold or two over. And if that big structure were to fall and hit the top of that mold, it's going to start tumbling. So when that happened, we stopped all lifting right away because we realized that we had someone that was that had called in sick from the reinforcement crew the day before. So we realized that's how we ended up without an L-bar in the structure. But the fear was, as every other structure that's poured in there, is it missing its L-bars? So we stopped everything. We were able to go back and review the cameras and see that every cage that was dropped other than this one had L-bars in there so we could safely resume. All right, so know your limits. Every piece of rigging and every piece of lifting equipment that we have here has a limit associated with that. In this case, this is one of the big chains out at the gantry, 39,100 pounds, and that's at a 90-degree angle, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But the important thing is to look for that on every piece. Before you lift something, you should know the weight of that structure, and you should know what the capacity is of every single piece of equipment in that lifting scenario. The crane, the shackles, the chain, the lifting anchors that are embedded into that structure. You know, if you're an experienced guy and you see a really big structure, you know, and you go to hook up to it and you see these little bitty anchors in there, raise a red flag and stop. So the tag that you see right here, that's a handwritten tag. That's one that we put on for extra clarity. But the metal stamp tag that you see there, we have a piece of rigging here. Different manufacturers have different types of tags, but any chain that is missing this metal tag, you're not allowed to use. We have to pull that out of service and bring it to get load tested again and get it re-tagged. But every piece of equipment, that's the important takeaway here. Spreader bars, chains, cranes, everything. So know those limits. The proper placement of anchors, so every one of you guys tie these things in every day. All of these anchors. So it's really important that the orientation of these, when we're lifting, we tie them in according to how it's going to be lifted, and then we never rig on this improperly to where we're going to pull any other way than right here in the center. So these are designed to where you can pull straight up on it once that pocket's formed, or they can be pulled basically like that middle picture there. You never want to put a side pull on these anchors. They're not designed for it, and it'll end up failing, pulling out. Well, I'll get into that in a second. So you'll see a few different ways that we put anchors in sometimes. One thing you notice about both of these is that they're all facing to the center. So what does that tell you about how you should be rigging on and lifting this? Does anybody want to take a stab at it? You want to be lifting in this scenario from a single point straight above so that it's putting those anchors, it's pulling in the right direction on there. Sometimes, in particular out at the gantry crane or some of the pieces that Miguel builds in Zone 5, you'll see that the anchors, rather than being pointed towards the center, these two might be straight up and down, and those might be straight up and down. Does anybody want to take a stab at why we do that? Anybody? Well, we do that if we're going to be lifting with a spreader bar. Unlike a single point pick there where everything's going to be going in towards the center, imagine if we were, make a change real quick. All right. So a spreader bar pick would be almost exactly like this. You're coming down from 2 points, and then your anchors are going to be spaced like that. So it's the very important thing for any of you guys that may be doing some type of lifting is if you see anchors spaced like this, don't grab onto it with a spreader bar to where you're pulling them sideways. And likewise, if you see a lift where the anchors are straight, don't try to rig onto it with a single point pick, because you're going to side pull those anchors and end up overloading. So lifting loops, the important thing here is how they're installed. 1/3 of that should be extended out of the concrete, and 2/3 should be embedded into it to get the full capacity. These, let's see if it's on the next slide, right? So the same with these, you don't want to ever pull to the side on these. If you see where the red arrows are pointing, those should always be up or somewhat slightly in towards the center if we're doing a center point pick. Dog bones. I know the catch basin crew uses these frequently. Sometimes we'll use these in the bridges and things like that. The important thing here, there's a few important things. One, the placement from the edge. We had a pull out a few months ago where one of these pulled out and we found that it was placed too close to the edge. So the general rule of thumb is for the height of this, 1.5 times that should be your edge distance. So this one's like a 6-inch anchor, so 9 inches from any edge. And the reason behind that, this little nub right here, that's all that's going to be gripping that concrete to give it its strength. And when these pull out, when these do fail, they always fail in a predictable way. It's going to be 45 degrees, approximately 45 degrees up, and it's going to be a cone all the way around that. So anybody that's ever seen one of these pull out, I tried to model it a little bit with styrofoam. It's going to happen pretty much exactly like that, and that's how we know the capacity of these things. But what happens if you can't tie this thing down low enough in the catch basin, and somebody says, well, it'll be all right if I just push it in a little bit? What happens when you do that? You end up with a lot less of that cone and a lot less capacity. Similar situation, if you look at this piece right here. So this is in a thin wall application like we use for our contact bridges a lot of times. We've had a couple situations where they got tied in and they weren't straight. And if you think about what you do there, if you remember what I told you, 45 degrees up, you have that cone. Well, look on this one, you'll get that 45 degree cone that way, but here you're cutting that cone in half. So again, you have a reduced capacity situation and you could end up with an anchor pulling out. We're going to get into some of the angles now with lifting. So sling angle is the angle, what we're always talking about with the sling angle is the angle between the concrete and that first sling. So with concrete, you never want to go in a steeper angle than 60 degrees. The anchors that we use are not rated for anything past that, and you'll see through this demonstration that as you go steeper and steeper of an angle, you put a lot more load on your slings and your anchors that are embedded. So we're going to do this little experiment. Jamie, you mind giving me a hand for this? I'll just get you to help read out what we have. So we're going to zero these scales out. So that spreader bar lift that we talked about earlier, we're getting about 22 pounds per. So if we look over here, we have our estimated weight of the structure at 45 pounds. So that's this entire piece. We're saying it's 45 pounds. So as we're rigged on right now, each one of these slings and each one of the anchors that are below it have that load evenly split about. So at 90 degrees, we have about 22.5 pounds per sling. So we're going to change that a little bit. So what we're going to be rigging on now is going to simulate a 60-degree sling angle. All right. So what do you think we have? You think we're still split evenly? Did the weight of this change at all? Or is this weigh the exact same that it did a second ago? So now we're at about 25 pounds on each leg of that sling. So how far do you think this is going to change? We're going to go to a 40-degree angle next. Remember, anything past the one I just showed you should never be done with concrete. All right, we're zeroed out. All right, so again, we didn't change anything on our weight. So 20 degrees more in sling angle, and we have about 30 pounds per sling now. We're gonna do one more. But I want you to realize also, if these were our lifting anchors, and now we're pulling at that angle, if you think about what we just said about how these things get their strength, you've got to imagine this thing is now trying to pull to the side like that. So it's going to create a prying motion, and it's going to end up chipping this out of the concrete. Do one more. Yeah, this is tough. Anybody want to guess?
About 37, 38.
Yep, about 39 and 39 and some change. So for simplicity, we're going to say 40 pounds. So almost double the weight of this structure is now the effect of what we're putting on there. So if you grabbed some chains and you checked before you did your lift, and this chain was rated at 25 pounds, and you didn't know anything about these sling angles, you said, okay, I'm safe for this lift, 25 pounds piece, weight of the structure is 45 pounds, so it's enough to handle my lift. And then you go and you rig onto anchors that are spread out way like this. You're gonna end up with a anchor pulling out, or a chain failing, or something really bad that we don't want to happen. Pull this down. All right. While we're on that, so one of the things Mr. Greg has done in the past to try to prevent things like that from happening is he was very careful with the chains that he put in each area. So over in post-production, they had chains that he knew would be able to pick up every piece coming out of that building without putting it in an unsafe angle. Well, as you can see, we have a nice shade structure out there, or we will once we get it put back up. So we're not going to be able to lift as high as we have always been with some structures. So the really nice thing about these chains that are about to roll out there is they're adjustable. With a quick adjustment, you now have shorter chains. The bad thing about that is that they are adjustable as well. And if someone doesn't know what they're doing, you could easily end up in a situation that we just saw there. So we want to make sure when we roll these out, everyone's paying attention. Everyone remembers this training and never puts these slings in a tight bind. And then as we get new guys, you guys are the ones that have to watch out and try to make sure they're not doing anything like that. Alright, we just talked about this. That 30-degree right there, you can see it puts double the effective weight on each sling, or double the tension. More of the same thing. So just talking about how those the angles are going to change that. Talk about that, the load on the cable. So one last thing, and then we're just about done here. So what's better, a 4-point pick or a 3-point pick? 4? 3? Y'all mind helping me out? Doing a little demo? Carl, you want to volunteer? Brian? 4-point pick. There's your 3. Have a seat. Any wobble to those?
Yeah, a little bit.
You got a little wobble? Carl? Alright,
Started.
Can I borrow that for a second? I worked hard on these. Alright guys, have a seat. Ryan, how's your wobble now?
A lot bigger.
Carl? You have all 3 legs on the ground at one time, Carl?
Yep.
How about you, Ryan? Are all 4 of your legs on the ground at one time?
Oh.
So just like with these stools and legs, a 4-point pick coming from a single point up above, you will almost never have all 4 of those slings in tension at one time. More than likely, you're going to end up with this situation here. So when we design those lifts in the office, if you have a 4-point pick there, 2 of those anchors are always going to be able to hold the weight of that piece. With 3, we split it up kind of evenly because of this situation that we just explained. With 3 slings, all 3 of those are always going to be in contact. They're all going to approximately have the same tension on them, as long as they're centered around the CG. Anybody know what CG is? Center of gravity. So if this piece had a hole in it, right here, a big hole, those anchors would be shifted a little bit more closer to that center of gravity, so that you still have all 3 legs with the same amount of tension on them. That's it. Anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
What about when I'm rolling a piece over when you change that, when you get it right to look at that?
When you're rolling a piece over, so those, we don't really account for that, to be honest with you. That's why we do it with everyone cleared away. We try to do it with experienced operators such as yourself. Ronald and I had that conversation this morning, and we were trying to figure out, okay, who's going to do our rolling? We don't just throw anyone to the wolves there, someone that's not that experienced, and say, hey, you're going to go flip these pieces even though you've never done it before, because it's tricky, you know. That piece that the anchor pulled out, how long ago? Were you flipping that at the time? And it was a piece, I think, that the anchor was too close to the edge, like we talked about before. But if it's going to fail, it's definitely going to fail when you're flipping it. So that's the answer there. It's really, they're not designed for that, but it's the best thing that we have to do. Any other questions? All right. If any of you do have any questions that you think of afterwards,